Picture this highly relatable and honestly highly stressful scenario. It is 4:30 p.m. on a Friday. You've just been handed a massive corporate data set. We're talking millions of rows, endless columns, fragmented dashboards from like 5 different departments. And your boss looks at you and simply says, "Hey, figure out why our profits are dropping." You can literally feel the panic setting in, right? It's completely overwhelming. So, what is your very first move with a million rows of data? If your immediate instinct is to fire up Excel or SQL or Python and dive straight into the numbers just looking for interesting patterns, well, you are definitely not alone. It's the most common beginner's urge out there. But it's also a massive pitfall. In the world of elite management consulting, they have a name for this. They call it the data trap. See, infinite data exploration feels super productive in the moment, doesn't it? But it usually just wastes incredible amounts of resources without ever actually answering what the client cares about. Real impact, the kind achieved by top-tier firms, relies on one absolute golden rule: hypothesis first, then data. A hypothesis acts as this crucial filter, making sure every single data query and statistical cut is strictly tied to testing something that actually matters. All right, so here is our roadmap for this explainer. We're going to cover escaping the data trap, the anatomy of testable hypotheses, the psychology of testing, the hypothesis blueprint, and finally, when to stop analyzing. Let's dive in. Starting right off with part 1, escaping the data trap. Because look, without a structured starting point, your analysis is just going to stretch on indefinitely. Moving to part 2, the anatomy of testable hypotheses. Let's really break down what makes a hypothesis robust enough for a fast-paced, high-stakes business environment. A good hypothesis isn't just a random guess, okay? It has to rest heavily on 3 strict pillars. First up, it has to be specific, meaning it clearly states what is expected to change and exactly why. Second, it needs to be verifiable. You have to actually be able to capture realistic data to prove it right or wrong. And third, it must be problem relevant. It has to directly target the core issue and be tied to a tangible real-world outcome. Let's make this concrete. We hear vague statements all the time in meetings, right? Things like, well, marketing could be improved. Okay, that is totally useless for analysis. It's not specific, and it's barely verifiable. Now compare that to this. Low conversion is driven primarily by checkout friction, not traffic quality. Boom. That is an excellent, actionable hypothesis. You know exactly what data you need to pull to test that. Now, as you build out these testable statements, you really need to understand an absolutely essential consulting concept: MEIS. It stands for Mutually Exclusive, Collectively Exclusive. Think of it like a giant puzzle. Your top-level hypotheses should comprehensively cover the entire scope of the problem. That's the collectively exclusive part, without any of the pieces overlapping with one another. That's the mutually exclusive part. This framework, it forces exceptionally clean, structured thinking right from the jump. So, the million-dollar question: how many of these MEIS hypotheses do you actually need? The magic sweet spot is 3 to 5. When you start a project, you want just 3 to 5 top-level hypotheses anchored directly to the core decision. If you find yourself listing out more than 5, honestly, it usually signals muddy thinking. It means there's an unclear problem statement, a total lack of prioritization, or you're just prematurely anchoring to whatever the client thinks the problem is. Keep it tight.
Part 3, the psychology of testing. This methodology is incredibly powerful, but it requires overcoming a massive mental barrier. And that barrier? It's the profound, deep-seated anxiety of being wrong. So many beginners completely panic if the data contradicts their initial hypothesis. They think, oh no, I failed. But you have to reframe this. Being efficiently wrong is progress. Having a hypothesis rejected is actually a massive step forward. Every single time you reject an idea, you rapidly narrow the scope of the problem. You sharpen your next guess, and you save your entire team from doing expensive, unneeded analysis. Your goal isn't to be right on the first try. It's to be efficiently wrong until you are directionally right for your client. This whole concept builds into 2 entirely different mindsets. Exploratory analytics asks this really open-ended question: what patterns exist in the data? It's super common, but it's highly inefficient. Conversely, hyper-focused, hypothesis-driven analysis asks, what must be true for this business decision to change? Starting with a hypothesis prioritizes speed and ensures that absolutely every step moves you closer to an actionable recommendation. Now, in the real world, stakeholders are inevitably going to insist on seeing all the data first. They want to boil the ocean. When this happens, here's your script. Look them in the eye and say,
We will first agree on what could be driving the outcome, and then we will pull the specific data required to test those exact ideas. You can do a light context scan, sure, but never, ever fully commit to massive data pulls until those hypotheses are firmly set.
Of course, you also have to guard against your own personal biases. To keep your analysis truly objective, force yourself to write if-then statements. Next, solicit opposing views early on. Literally ask your team for at least 2 plausible alternative explanations. Tie every single data task to a hypothesis. And crucially, fact-check data anomalies early because, let me tell you, bad data will ruin even the most beautifully structured hypothesis.
All right, part 4, the hypothesis blueprint. Let's look at the exact tool used by top-tier professionals to craft their analytical approach. This blueprint is essentially a fill-in-the-blank formula, and it has 5 essential components: driver, observable outcome, mechanism, analysis, and action. It reads exactly like this. We believe the driver is causing the outcome because of the mechanism. We will test this by looking at this data. If true, we should take this action. Let's actually plug this into a concrete case study to see the blueprint in action. Imagine a subscription business that's really struggling to keep its customers. We fill in our template. We believe poor onboarding, that's our driver, is causing low retention, the outcome, because of a first-month dissatisfaction spike. That's the mechanism. We will test this by pulling cohort retention data and support tickets, the test. If true, we should improve onboarding, the action. Notice what this does. It uses causal reasoning to tie a driver directly to an outcome, creating an exact, non-exploratory testing framework. And when you execute that design and pull only that specific data, you instantly see the reality of that first-month dissatisfaction spike. You look at the numbers and boom, there is an incredibly sharp drop-off right at month 1. By pulling only this specific cohort data, we just confirmed our targeted hypothesis. We didn't waste weeks on irrelevant marketing metrics. We proved our case efficiently and decisively. Which brings us to our final section, part 5, when to stop analyzing. Because look, even with a brilliant hypothesis, analysts can endlessly wander through the data if they aren't careful. Here is your ultimate exit criteria. When the cost of precision is mathematically greater than the value of the insight, you stop. You stop analyzing the very second your hypothesis is supported or rejected with enough confidence to make the decision at hand. Crunching numbers for days just for an extra decimal point of accuracy, that is a total waste of resources. So, let's summarize the core takeaways from this explainer. Starting with a hypothesis literally changes everything. You need to focus on business decisions over interesting data patterns. You must rely on specific, verifiable targets to guide your queries rather than vague ideas. And above all, you have to value the efficiency of rejection. Embrace being efficiently wrong. A hypothesis clarifies the decision, protects your valuable time, and ultimately gets you to do right answer faster and cleaner than any other method out there. I'm going to leave you with a provocative question to reflect on as we wrap up today. What is the absolute biggest data trap you've fallen into in your own career? Think about a time you tried to boil the ocean, and imagine how using this hypothesis blueprint could have saved you days or maybe even weeks of stressful work. It is time to step back, start writing those if-then statements, and execute with pure intent. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and as always, keep learning.